today you can see another significant federal law enforcement presence here, and what's really been kind of a stunning militarization of city streets in Washington, D.C. These officers are federal law enforcement of some variety. I would love to tell you more, but they're not wearing any identifying badges, insignias, nameplates. They won't tell me where they're from or who they're with.
When other countries do this in other overseas invasions that they don't want to call invasions, we call these little green men. People who are in military or paramilitary garb and serving that sort of function, but nobody owns them. Nobody says who they are. Nobody admits who they are. As protests against the killing of George Floyd have continued for another day, for a seventh straight day in D.C., it's not just D.C. National Guard that's been patrolling the streets and D.C. cops. It's not even just the National Guard troops from 10 other states that aren't D.C. that the White House flew in. There's also this strange other force on the streets. Law enforcement officers, maybe, at least it seems like they're law enforcement officers, wearing no identifying insignia for any law enforcement agency, no name badges. And in many cases, even when they're asked by protesters or the press, they will not say who they are or who pays them. Take these guys in helmets and tactical vests. A reporter asked who they were with. They would say only the Department of Justice, which is not really an answer. It's not like there's a generic Department of Justice police force that explains that. Another reporter asked this group of gentlemen in riot gear if they were with the Bureau of Prisons, which is one of the federal agencies that has deployed some officers in Washington. They responded to that question with one word, quote, maybe we're with the Bureau of Prisons. That's cute. I mean, how do we know that these people are who they say they are at all? If they'll say anything at all. We just take their word for it that they're with the Department of Justice or maybe the Bureau of Prisons? And why are these guys wearing no badges, nameplates, no insignias? How does that help them in what they're doing in the streets? I mean, there's a reason a police officer who has the power to stop you, detain you, arrest you, use physical force against you, there's a reason a police officer has a badge number and a name in plain sight. The only reason to have officers take those identifying markings off is to avoid accountability for what they're doing, right? If they do anything wrong, it makes it a deniable offense, not just by them personally, if you can pick them out of a lineup, but also by anybody who might potentially be held accountable for having ordered that, offensive or injurious or illegal action against you. If these are just randomly unidentifiable people with no names and no agencies associated with them, what do you do if they violate your rights or hurt you? How do you know who did it? How do you know who issued their orders? But the other, and honestly darker prospect here, even darker than apparently federal law enforcement being deployed in this fashion against Americans in American streets, the even darker prospect here is this. I mean, who's to say these guys are law enforcement? What's to distinguish these unidentified, supposedly federal forces from random, self-motivated guys with guns who want to come down to these protests and play Civil War as private citizens, or just hang out and be seen with their military-style weaponry and their off-the-shelf tactical gear? I mean, especially in the middle of a big rowdy protest, how are we going to tell the difference between unidentified, unname-badged federal officers and, say, this guy who showed up at a protest in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho today with a gun bigger than him and two more strapped to his back and his side? Or how about this guy who decided to do heavily armed traffic control at a protest in Casper, Wyoming, just on his own say-so, just your average local guy with a gun who's stopping you in the street? Or how about these randos who showed up at a rally in New Mexico, in their words, to, quote, protect people? I mean, one of these guys shoots you? We're supposed to fall back on, well, hey, maybe he was a cop? Maybe he was a soldier? Maybe he was, but who knows? Maybe he was some random self-motivated PE teacher with a Reddit account and a big weird gun collection? Just submit to their authority? Try not to get shot by them, and if you do, I mean, this week, one public official in an absolutely uniquely difficult position to deal with this kind of bizarre mystery use of force and show of force against American civilians is the mayor of our nation's capital, who has had to contend with large protests, lots of mayors have, But she's also, on top of that, had to contend with a growing and increasingly inexplicable federal security presence in her city streets, while also being the target herself of White House vitriol. Joining us now is the mayor of Washington, D.C., Muriel Bowser. Madam Mayor, thank you so much for making time tonight. I know you have a million things on your plate.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Let me ask you about what I just described in terms of the federal forces in the streets in D.C. and what strikes me as strange and worrying about them. I have to ask if you have a different perspective on them, if you and your team in D.C. city government have more of a sense of who these armed men are and why they're not wearing any identifying information.
No, we have the same reaction as you do, and many Americans might wonder how it is that this could be happening in America. And when you look at the nation's capital, you know we are very unique. We are the nation's capital, a federal district, and not a state. We're 700,000 people that pay taxes, yet we don't have 2 senators or full autonomy. And so because of our lack of statehood, the federal government can encroach on our city streets in the name of protecting federal assets. And so that's what's been done here. I think it's unprecedented that state troopers from other states have been brought into the district, and these unnamed other federal police officers. And you make a very good point. We know some of the agencies who are here. We don't know why they don't have any identifying marks, and none of them should be armed.
Do you know what the command structure is? There has been open source reporting, and William Barr, the Attorney General, commented on it a little bit at his press conference at the Department of Justice, saying that the president had asked him to be in charge of these sort of policing and or paramilitary forces, including some of them that he fully admitted were outside the Justice Department and outside any of its subsidiary agencies. Do you know what the command structure is in terms of who these forces answer to?
Well, I think that there may be even some confusion among the federal agencies. We think that Attorney General Barr has been designated by the president to be the leader of the federal forces in Washington. But let me also be clear: I don't want them to be confused with our police department, the Metropolitan Police Department, 4,000 strong, that reports to Chief Newsham, who reports directly to me. So we are policing our city streets. The feds are focused on their federal assets, except they grow, and they have grown, and they're moving around in these ominous outfits and vehicles, including helicopters and Humvees.
I know that tonight is your first night in several days without a curfew in place in D.C. Madam Mayor, can you just tell us, you've been through so much in your tenure as mayor, and you know the history of D.C. I know you're the 4th or 5th generation D.C. Yourself in terms of your family. How serious do you think the crisis is right now in Washington, both in terms of the protests, but in terms of the response to them and the way the federal government is treating your city right now? How different, how much more serious is this than the kind of things that D.C. is used to having to cope with?
Well, we have to suffer the indignity of not having 2 senators every day in Washington, D.C. And what that means is we don't have 2 people fighting for resources for us, and we've seen the effects of that during COVID. No one can remember, however, when even our limited home rule has been challenged by the federal government, especially with something so important as policing. And that's what we've experienced over the last week. And while that is a concern for us, certainly, and we're fighting back at every level, Rachel, it should be a concern for every American because they're moving on us hard and strong right now. But I think, and he's even said that this is practice. So who's next? So we need to watch these tactics and make sure that he's pushing down on us now and we're pushing back hard. And every American needs to be concerned about that and be with us because who's to say that it won't be another state next?
Muriel Bowser, Mayor of Washington, D.C. Madam Mayor, again, you have so much on your plate right now. Thank you for helping us understand what's going on in your great city. Thank you.
Thank you.
All
Thank
right.
you.
We've got much more ahead here tonight. Do stay with us.